Hal was sick just a couple of weeks ago, I visited with Herschel Honia this afternoon, and he was telling me that 2 weeks ago, Sunday, that Virginia was not feeling well, and that's why they weren't here. And then the next Sunday, he was the one that was all messed up and not feeling well. So keep all of them in your prayers. And does anyone else want to mention someone that we need to be praying for?
Real quick, for those who remember Guy,
Okay.
which is Jeremy's dad, remember the Browns?
Yeah.
Jeremy, he was put on hospice. He was on facial issue.
Really? There was a couple that was here in the military, and his father came down and stayed with us close to a year.
Yeah, he preached.
Yeah, he'd been to Sunset, and so he's been put on hospice. Okay. All right. Yeah, they were Panhandle people. Brother Mike, do you by chance have a song picked out? All right. And after Brother Dove leaves us, well, here comes Junie. Okay. You got a song picked out? Well, Brother Mike's picking one out. Go ahead, Mike. I'll tell you what, after Mike leads us in the song, Brother Jenny, would you lead us in prayer? And we have been specifically talking about Hal and Kim Ramsey and Herschel and Virginia Honia and their health situation. And they just shared that Guy Brown, who was the father of Jeremy Brown, they were here a few years ago, that Guy's been put on hospice. So those and others that you may know of personally, as I'm sure we all do, let's be mindful of them in our prayers. Brother Dove. 193. And in case you're interested, I will not be home tomorrow during trick-or-treat time. So no need to come to my house. Yeah. All right. Everybody on chapter 15? Good for you. Comes right after 14, doesn't it? The section here in most Bibles is, and in the first verse, refers to this as a song, and it's called the Song of Moses. They did not typically sing like we think of singing today. We know even down to the time of Jesus that typically what they did was what you and I would call a chant. So I don't know. I'm not putting this out as, absolute concrete. But my suspicion is that Moses probably called out some of this in Hebrew, their language, and then they repeated it back to him. I don't know that, but that would be suitable, because if I spring a new song on you, you're not going to be able to sing it the way, we sing with notes and four-part harmony and all that kind of stuff. You're going to be wondering what I'm doing and where I'm going. But anyway, it's an important passage. Again, we have to remember that this book of Exodus is not just a record of what happened, but it is a part of who they are, and it's integral to them as a nation, as a family. And we've mentioned before, and you know this, that when they sit down to do the Passover, they talk in the present tense, when we were delivered from Egypt. Well, Granddad, that's been 300, 400, 500 years ago. Yeah, I know, but when we were delivered from Egypt. So it's personal, which I like in the sense of our being reminded of our own relationship with God and our need for salvation. And we were saved. I don't know if you remember the date in which you were baptized, but I suspicion you remember what happened on that day. You may not remember the exact date. I happen to remember mine simply because it was written down. And then it just so happened that my son Greg was born on that day. So, a few years later. But nevertheless, when I was saved, when you were saved, when we were saved, it was a significant event in our lives. And it's always personal. And it's always now. It's when we were delivered from sin. So that's how I at least read and understand passages like this. The first question says, note some of the major ideas expressed in the song. Victory over the Egyptians. Parallel, we have what? We got victory over Satan. Okay, what else? God's power and deliverance. And we are delivered also by the power of God, of Jesus. We're saved. Any others? By whom? All right. What am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to obey. Anybody else? Another one? Yeah. There are so many, even today, what we could label false gods. They're not necessarily gods, but we almost treat them like that. We don't go somewhere and worship them, but we've got access to them. We know about them. I'm trying to think of, something that's very good. Hospitals and doctors. I don't object to those. And they many times save our lives, but they don't save our souls. All right, anyone else got another one you want to share? A warning. And when we go to the New Testament, we've been saying so much recently that most of the letters were all warnings. You know, you start with Romans, and from there on, it's like straighten up, fly right. You know, do what God says. Return to what we preached in the first place. All right, good. Anyone else? Number 2. Talk about Israel's attitude about the bitter water. They grumbled. All right, good. Ungrateful.
They kind of forgot that God got them through destroying the Egyptians and all that. If he was going to do that, he's going to take care of it.
Yeah. What do you think bitter water is?
Probably more alkaline.
Something about it didn't taste smooth. I grew up in an area where the water was very soft. And it was not unusual that if we had guests and they were staying overnight and were going to shower, they'd be in the bath of the shower forever. I mean, you're like, what are they doing? And then finally they'd get out and says, I just couldn't wash the soap off. Well, what it is, our water was so soft that it was like washing in a hair conditioner. You know how hair conditioner makes your hair soft? And the soap was gone, but they just felt like all over their skin they still had soap. They did not. The water was different. I remember the first time I visited Abilene as a boy. I think I was 11. And I visited Abilene as a boy, and their water was hard, and it tasted weird. So was this really nasty water? May have been, or maybe just different from what they were used to. Because when we don't like things, we label them.
Well, we have found that the bitter water that they found in South America was water with quinine in it, and so
Okay.
the quinine, it tastes terrible.
Tastes bad.
But
But if you're starving to death and about to die of lack of water, and somebody gives you a canteen and you don't like how it tastes, that's kind of being ungrateful, isn't it? You know, I mean, here I am about to die from dehydration. My lips are cracked, and you give me this flask of water. Yeah. You know, you got any RC Cola? Got any Dr. Pepper? This water tastes bad. What are you talking about? So what we're seeing here is not just a pattern within the Israelites, but again, it's a human problem. It's a humanity problem. We all are blessed in so many ways. So many ways we're blessed.
The problem with the Israelites is that they encounter bitter water and they grumble. They don't go to Moses and say, Moses, can you ask God to use the better water?
Yeah.
They don't. And this happens repeatedly over the next 40 years. It's not that God doesn't want to listen to them, doesn't want to give granted what they want. They don't ask. They just complain.
As you said, for the next 40 years. And again, it's a humanity problem. We today, as far as we know historically, I would say we live in the best period of humanity. I mean, we've got so much, and yet we struggle with appreciation and gratitude. It's not enough. Anyway. And again, I guess for me, where I'm coming from, it's a humanity problem. That makes it my problem. A lack of appreciation for what I have and how I've been blessed by God. Anyone else?
They use Moses as their go-to guy.
Yeah. Moses was their one between them and God. And you were saying?
I was just going to say that most Americans don't realize that the people in poverty live richly in comparison with other people around the world.
Yes, I've used, it's been several years since I got this statistic, but if you are in America on welfare, you're better off than 95% of the rest of the world. That's shocking. That's shocking.
Well, we take for granted the things that we have, Jeremy.
Yeah. And not only take it for granted, we want better. Which is not bad for us to want better if we're the ones willing to put forth the effort and make it better. But if we're just blaming God and grumbling, then we got a problem. Anyone else? All right, what do you know about manna? Did I skip a question? Okay, why would it be important for Israel to find provisions in the desert? They're going to be there for a while? Yes. And what do you have in the desert? Yeah. They're clustered up. Yeah, and as you said, it's not the Sahara Desert with just nothing but sand dunes. It's more like El Paso's desert. It's more like West Texas and New Mexico. That's what it's like. So there is some vegetation there to be eaten, and if they find an oasis, they got a little water. So it's important for them to have provisions because they can't, quote unquote, live off the land like you were in East Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, Kentucky, and up, Kansas, up there, where they got a lot of rain and a lot of plants. It's important. What's manna? Yeah. Have you ever sat down to eat? Someone put a plate of food in front of you and you said, "What is this?" I don't recognize this. It's goulash. Oh, okay. Whatever that is. What is manna? They've never seen it. They don't recognize it. I don't know what it tastes like. Oleander seed? Yeah? You like seeds? But it's strange, isn't it? Now, every day they were to gather their manna and don't gather extra. And what happened if they gathered extra? Yeah. Now, there's some people that said, we're talking about a couple of quarts per person according to the notes. So I'm going to gather 2 liters or 2 quarts of this stuff for each one in my family. And if I gather 3 liters so we can have a late night snack, it's going to spoil. Except on what day? Yeah, Friday. Then you can gather double because what's going to happen on the Sabbath? You don't have to work. You don't have to cook it. You can cook it and it won't go bad. They didn't have refrigeration. And when you cook something and you don't have refrigeration, 12, 24, 36 hours later, you got a problem, especially out there with all the flies and insects and all that kind of stuff you got around. What do we see in that? Other than the fact we'll talk about they're not working. What do you see in the manna not spoiling on the Sabbath? God's hand. God's involved in their lives. Right. So, again, it's God's power, God's blessing, God's guidance. It's God doing this for them. And if you think about it this way, every day you get up, you open the kitchen cabinet, and it's empty. And you think, well, I got to run to the store. There's nothing in the store. In fact, there is no store. So you go out of your tent, and what do you see? Manna. So God's feeding you every day. Yeah. So again, this is not just a historical story. This is about who they are, what their attitude's supposed to be like toward God, their appreciation and understanding of what God's doing for them, blessing them. God takes care of me every day. Every day. Anyone else? Something to share?
That happened for 40 years.
All right. He did. Took care of it. Yeah. Man in the morning, quail in the evening. Tested the skills of the cook. She can handle that. All right. But again, the focus, or for me, the lesson here is what they had to learn about Jehovah, Yahweh, taking care of them, not just in the desert, not just for that 40 years, but all of their life. Even today, those who are what we would call Orthodox Jews, this is a passage for them. They know the Song of Moses. They know the recounting of this event, this story. And I think it's important for us to understand the concepts that are here. All right. All right. Did anybody get the definitions of Massa and Mirab? More or less.
Okay. It was the site that the Israelites passed through. It's where the Israelites were, very thirsty.
Okay.
I can't read my own writing.
I understand.
The contention of the children of Israel, because they tempted the Lord by saying, "Is the Lord among us?"
Yeah. Every time things get a little more difficult or don't go quite like they wanted, they begin to question, is God really helping us? Is God really for us? And again, we're talking about humanity. We're talking about human nature. When things get rough in life, many times people say, why is God mad at me? What's gone wrong? Well, let's trust in God no matter what our situation is, no matter how bad our situation might be.
There were times where they thought maybe they made a mistake and leaving Egypt too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that happened real quick. Yeah. All right. Who's Jethro and what did he do?
He was a priest of Midian.
All right, so Jethro is a priest. It never tells us a priest of whom. My assumption is he's a priest of Yahweh. Maybe not, but that's where I come from. And what's his relationship? Moses' father-in-law.
He brought Moses, his wife, and his son.
Okay. And then he gave Moses some advice. Yeah. You're going to wear yourself out. As Mike said, we're talking about, 1 million people, 600,000 men. So that's 600,000 reasons for people to disagree, to argue over something. And have you ever been in a situation where you had to talk to a bunch of people all day long? Maybe you've been a supervisor or a boss, and every 10 minutes you got a couple or three people come in and complaining about something, and you got to hear them and then give a solution or point them in a direction. And okay, you clocked in at 8 o'clock. It's now 9 o'clock, and I've had 20 people in my office complaining, and I'm trying to sort it out. And Jethro says, Moses, you're going to kill yourself. You're going to wear yourself out. And he suggests to him that he break it down. How, tier your judgment. Tier your...
People in charge of different groups of
Yeah.
people to handle
Mhm.
those problems, and the major ones, Moses could decide.
Anybody else? Since Moses had been in the palace for 40 years, I'm wondering why he didn't think of that himself. But anyway. Question 8. Conceive of a reason that neither Israel or the animals were to touch the foot of Mount Sinai. Okay, good. What else?
I just looked up because of their ungratefulness and constant complaining.
Ungratefulness and constant complaining. All right, good. What else? Know who you're dealing with here. Have you ever been around something that's real dangerous? Like maybe an angry dog that was on a leash or a chain? Or maybe you saw a poisonous snake? What do? Keep your distance. Yeah, stay away. God is righteous. He's powerful. And they need to understand that they just can't enter into the presence of perfection and godliness and goodness in their sinful state. So it's a teaching point as I see it. Don't even let your animals wander in here. Definitely don't you come in here. You be aware of who and where God is. It's a respect issue. The word fear that's typically translated fear actually comes from a word which means respect. And we need to respect God. Do we fear God? Not in the sense of being terrified like a vicious animal is chasing us, but respect for who and what He is. You meet someone of high rank, and what do? You say, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. You're polite. You don't go in there and smart mouth around. So this is God. Learn some respect. We teach our little children. They don't know any better. So what do? We teach them to be respectful to certain situations, certain events. Oh, okay. All right, good. Hi, Rose. Okay. Question 9. Consider the reason for the thick cloud and lightning on the mountain.
God was coming in the cloud and speaking.
Okay. Power of God. Mm-hmm. Okay. In many ways, I think it's the same answer as the previous question. Ditto. Who are you dealing with? God. And the cloud, you know, you ever been in a really, really heavy fog? You know, it's almost like a gray night. You can't see anything. And lightning's going off. That's impressive. That's scary. And yet God is not just in there. He is that. He's respect who you're dealing with. Understand you're dealing with Yahweh. And Yahweh is here. Real life. Yeah. Yeah. And let me leap into our time. I'm not being critical. I'm just observing how we sometimes feel or conduct ourselves when we observe the Lord's Supper. It's almost like we don't really know what we're doing. But hey, what did Jesus say? This is my body. This is my blood. And we are there commemorating his death, his burial, his resurrection, and looking to his return. It's not just, hey, we got to get this over with so that we can get on with something else. No. It's important. What's happening to them here, they're about to get the Decalogue, they're about to get the Ten Commandments, and this is a momentous situation for them. God is in their presence, and he's going to be talking to Moses, and he's going to be giving Moses instructions on how they're to be as a nation. Respect. Anyone else? Chapter 20. Question 10. Did Israel respond as it was expected that they would? Yeah. They're terrified. Now, again, we can't touch the mountain. We can't even see the top of the mountain because it's covered in fog and lightning bolts are popping all around. In verse 20, they say, Moses, you go talk to God and then come back and tell us, because if he talks to us, why would they say that? We're going to die. Yeah. Which is what scared them to death. Yeah, or less. Here's the deal. They were not terrified of what the commandments or what the Decalogue were, though that was impressive, but they're terrified of the voice of God. I know you've been in situations where something was real loud. Maybe it was an automobile engine, maybe it was a band, maybe it was an explosion, and it startled you because you weren't expecting it. All of a sudden, blah, got this tremendous noise. I don't know what the voice of God was like. I don't know whether it was just a big loud noise or whether they all heard it in their head without hearing any sound at all. I don't know. But whatever happened, they're scared. Now, you get the picture, the mountain, the fog, the smoke, the voice. You think they'd never forget that. You think they would always walk the straight and narrow. Doesn't happen. All right. Going back now to chapter 20 and the Decalogue, the first part, we have a different division of the Decalogue. We'll talk a little bit more about it next week. The Jewish people, they arrange it one way, the Roman Church arranges it another way, and then those who aren't in either of those two categories, shall we say Protestants, they arrange and count them in a little bit different way. And there's different reasons for that, theological. There's always been criticism against the Roman Church of how they do it because of what? Well, they don't leave anything out. They just kind of push it up here. And what is it that they're seeking to do? Avoid criticism for their images, because that's the criticism they get for having, graven images. Not of God, but of other individuals or instances. But the Ten Commandments, chapter 20, and God spoke all these words, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Anybody care to share anything about that idea? Yeah, I'm the one true God. And that's a little different in how the verse is worded, the way we would typically say it. Go ahead. Yeah. Don't have any. Yeah. But the way it's worded, sometimes this is how some people would think that, he's got to be God number one. But that's not what he's saying at all. He said, I'm God number only. That's it. And what does he started out by saying, who brought you out of Egypt and out of the land of slavery. How does that parallel to our situation? We have been brought out of sin. We've been brought out of slavery. We've been brought out of condemnation. We have been freed. That's what he did for Israel. That's what he has done for Christians. Anyone who will believe and follow him. You shall have no other gods before me. That means no one else. My NIV says in the footnote where the word before says besides. You will have no other gods besides me. Verse 4, you shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, and note again, in all of these cases where we're seeing the word Lord, what do you note about it? It's all caps. They may be small like the lowercase letters, but they're capitalized letters. And this is the translator's way of telling us this is the sacred tetragrammaton. This is the word that's translated Jehovah or translated Yahweh. And it's a word that we don't know how to pronounce because the Jews wouldn't say it. And they didn't use vowels when they wrote. They just wrote the consonants. Have you seen that little thing, I guess you call it a meme, and it's like 2 or 3 sentences long, and all the letters are scrambled. The only letters that are right are the first letter and the last letter, and all the letters in between of the words are scrambled up. And believe it or not, most people can read it. It says, if you can read this, and yeah, I can read it, but it's all scrambled up. Well, they didn't have vowels in Hebrew. You're just supposed to know them. And when they quit saying Yahweh, or whatever how that was supposed to be pronounced, they lost what the vowels were. But it's the I am, it's the breath, it's the God. All right, verse 20, or 7 rather, verse 7, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. And this is why they wouldn't pronounce the word, because they were afraid of misusing it. You think that's what God and Moses meant? Did God not want them to use his name for fear they'd mispronounce it? Yeah. It's in the cursing or the false oaths, things that you might say. Verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. And what happened or could not happen on the Sabbath? Yeah, nobody. This wasn't, okay, the boss gets to take off and everybody else has to serve him. Everybody's. Doesn't work. Nobody works. Not even the animals. Your plow horse. You don't hitch up your horse and go riding somewhere. You hitch it up to the wagon and go see Grandma. No, you all stay home. Everybody rest. And years ago, I heard someone say that after their vacation, they needed another week to rest up. They had a week vacation to come back, needed a week to rest up. Well, see, that's what we do with our so-called days off. I work 5 days a week. Some people now are pushing for a 4-day work week. But what do we do on our days off? Well, and we play so hard, we exhaust ourselves, so that when we come back to work, we're dragging. What's the matter? Oh, man, I played tennis all weekend. I'm so sore. What? So, not only were they not supposed to work, what were they supposed to be doing in that downtime? Recuperating, thinking about how God had blessed them, thinking about what God had done for them, honoring God. That's the point here. That's the issue. Again, honoring God. Don't walk on the mountain. Don't go in the cloud and the lightning. You don't want to hear God speak? Okay, but it's all about respecting and honoring God. And I guess we can ask ourselves, do we do that? Do I do that? And if so, how? How can I do a better job of that? Honor your father and mother. How do we do that? Showing respect for them, all right? Generally speaking, fathers and mothers have the best intentions in their heart for their children. And yet it's not unusual that you get to a certain point where you think you know more than mom and dad. Maybe you do. But they may still have some wisdom. Now, who's this verse written to? Well, to the Jews, but I'm thinking about age appropriateness. I don't think it's written to a bunch of 10 and 15-year-olds. I think it's written to adults about honoring your father and your mother. Because God deals with the adults. Yeah. Well, actually, Mark Twain said it was amazing how much smarter his father got from when Mark Twain was 15 to 21. So at least he's one of them that's credited to saying something like that. So, yeah. 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 And commentaries on that passage go so far as to say that the money wasn't given to the temple, it's just been promised. Oh, I'd love to pay your rent, Mom. I'd love to buy you some groceries, Mom, but I promised to give this money to the temple, which I'm not really going to, but I said I would. And so they are dishonoring Mom and Dad by refusing to care for them, to help them in their needy situation. And that's not written to a 15-year-old. That's written to somebody who's 40 or 50. So, yeah. I think we need to remember there was a movie made, I think it was called something Horse, about an Englishman who was captured by American Indians. What? Man Called Horse. Okay. And in that movie, I don't know whether this is true or not, whether it depicted reality or not, but in that movie there was an elderly lady whose son died, and at that point she was pushed out of the teepee and was left to freeze to death, left to eat the scraps of food that were left over. And had it not been for the man called Horse, who had by that time earned a position as a brave in the Indian tribe, and he took her in, where the rest of them would have been very happy to let her freeze to death, starve to death. And I'm saying all of this to come back to the passage here. In many cultures, they didn't care for their aged. They didn't care for their old. They didn't care for their parents. You know? Yeah, it's up to you. Do what you can. Probably won't make it through the winter or whatever, but anyhow. And here it is, honor your parents, which carries the concept again of respect and caring for them. All right, good. You shall not murder. Unfortunately, the King James translation read what? Yeah. There have actually been people who were vegetarians because of this passage, of the King James passage, thou shalt not kill. They thought it was wrong to kill an animal and eat it. And there's even some who wouldn't eat a fruit until it fell off the tree. They couldn't pick it. It has to fall off the tree before they would eat it. I don't know how long those people live, but nevertheless, this passage is about murder. Not about, well, we've mentioned previously that we got the Decalogue or 10 Commandments, but then you go through the rest of Exodus and Leviticus, and you've got 617, I think, commands that basically say if you kill a man because you're chopping wood and the axe flies off the head of the axe flies off and hits the man and kills him, that's not murder. And that's where you had the cities of refuge. If the head of your axe flew off and killed my son or my father, I might be angry enough to kill you. But what you can do is run to the city of refuge and get a fair trial. That's the point of those things. And so, thou shalt not murder is what you and I would call murder. Not about picking fruit or killing a cow. It's about murdering another human being. Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm getting texts from Democrats and Republicans asking me to donate. All right, good luck. Now, thou shalt not commit adultery. And that includes more than how we understand it. It's the vow breaking. Advoutry was an early English translation, meaning don't break your vows. And that would be a marital vow. It'd be any kind of vow that you make. You know, be a person of your word. In the New Testament, Jesus says, let your yea be yea and your nay be nay. Whatever you say is good. It's gold. And then, thou shalt not steal. What's stealing? How big does it have to be? Yeah, but for some people, you know, if it's just a little bit, it's only a few hundred, or a few thousand, or a few million. Yeah, just a couple of pieces of candy or whatever. Yeah, and we rationalize and we excuse ourselves, and mark ourselves as not guilty because we hasn't reached what we consider the limit, our limit.
It's like a white lie.
Oh, what? Yeah.
It's still a lie.
Thou shalt not steal. Not give false testimony against your neighbor. Not covet your neighbor's house, or wife, or servant, or maidservant, livestock, or anything that belongs. What's covet? Okay, what's the difference in covet and admiration? My neighbor buys a new car and I admire it. Is that coveting? What's the difference? Yeah, actually this verse could have gone in front of thou shalt not steal. You know, they're connected. When you covet something, it means that you are willing to go to an extreme action to gain it. I thought you were going to say something else. Yeah. And even if it doesn't mean stealing, it sometimes can mean damage. I knew a widow lady who lives on the west side whose husband was very good at working on cars. And they had like at least 3, maybe 4. And while she and he were driving a couple of them, he'd be working on the other 2. And when one of the ones they were driving would break down, they were just in rotation. He was constantly working on cars. It was like a hobby. He enjoyed it. And it's also cheap transportation. He died. She couldn't do that. So she sold all those cars and bought herself a new car. She came out of the Albertson grocery store one day and somebody had walked all the way around her car and keyed it. You know, she took a key and scraped it, made a mark all the way around it. And the lady was sitting there next to her, says, I saw the man do it. But, you know, she couldn't do anything about it and the man was gone. But what he did in keying that car was actually a demonstration of coveting. He didn't steal it, but he sought to damage it, to destroy it. Why? Yeah, it's coveting. So we've got theft involved. We've got just destruction of someone else's property. Our mind, our hearts, about who we are and what we do. Anybody else? Anything else to share? And the guy that, go ahead, I'm sorry. Yeah. And this guy that keyed the cart would have probably stolen it if he thought he could have gotten away with it. Because that attitude, that seed was there, and the anger and hatred are the same way. All right, thank you very much. I appreciate your participation.